Howdy folks, this is Big Sam. Welcome back to the Mosin Museum. Today we're taking a look at a rifle I never thought I'd have a chance to see in person. In fact, I didn't know that really hardly any of these existed, let alone existed in the United States, but yet here we are. Today we're taking a look at an Imperial Russian Berdan II that started life out as a black powdered cartridge 10mm single shot rifle that was converted in Belgium to 7.62 by 54 rimmed using basically the exact same specifications as a Mosin barrel. So it's sort of like back half Berdan, front half Mosin. Why does this thing exist? Well, in order to understand why this gun exists, I think we have to take a quick trip back in time to 1891 when the Mosin Nagant Model 1891 was adopted. Now, some people don't realize that Leon Nagant actually had his completely own design for a firearm, and it was actually accepted. Well, it wasn't accepted, sorry. What I meant to say was, it's kind of a weird story, it beat out the Mosin, and it wasn't accepted because Russia. So even though it was determined that Leon Nagant's rifle was better than the Mosin was still adopted. Now, Nagant was still given credit for the whole magazine system used on the Mosin, hence the name Mosin Nagant. However, I think my theory is that he was still a little bit sore that his rifle was deemed better and it still didn't win. Kind of reminds me of the whole Glock 19X versus SIG P320 fiasco. But you know what? We're not going to go into that today. Anyway, what we're going to talk about is his design. So there's very little known about this gun. I've looked in books and I've only found pictures of one of these that I think it's in a museum in Russia. And unfortunately it's been deactivated. But as best I can tell after doing some translating, Russia was at least sort of interested in seeing if they could convert their existing, at that time they probably had over 1 million Berdan IIs laying around. Could they convert those to 7.62 by 54, the newly adopted cartridge, instead of just throwing them away? Kind of reminds me of when they took the Kernka and adopted it by converting a lot of their old percussion muskets into breech-loading rifles. They probably had the same rationale here. Well, Leon Nagant set off to make his own way to do this in 1892. In fact, that's what this is. As far as we know, this is called the Leon Nagant Model of 1892 thing. That's pretty much what this thing is. So in 1892, as far as we can tell, he made maybe up to 3,000 of these. It seemed like for the trials, the Russian government mandated that 3,000 of these had to be produced. So it's possible. I don't really know. The serial number on this one, serialized by Liège, is serial number 4413. I don't know what that means. The serial numbers could have started at 4,200 for all we know, or 1. We don't really know. There's no way to tell that, unfortunately. There is some debate on when these were made. However, I'm very certain, based off of what I read in this Russian book, calling this the Model 1892, and a few different markings on this gun, which we're going to take a look at here in a second. I believe this gun actually was made late 1892 up to early 1893, somewhere in there. Very, very few of these guns still exist. I don't know why this gun exists, but it's here, so we're going to take a look at it today. If you're interested in following along with us as we take a look at some of the markings and whatnot, make sure to go check our link down in the description below. We have this gun on the Mosin Museum website in ultra high resolution, and you can see some of the interesting markings and read a little bit more about its history as well. If you have any more questions that you want to know about, because again, there's very little documentation on these rifles. make sure to drop us an email and let us know what you think of the video. But let's go ahead and go take a closer look at this rifle now. All right, so now we can go ahead and take a closer look at some of the really interesting quirks and features of this Berdan II. Now, the first thing we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at some of the markings. And these markings are helpful because there's a couple of different indicators of when this gun was actually made. Now, the first one that we're going to talk about is this one that sticks out like a sore thumb. It's this oval with the letters ELG right here. Now, that basically means my French is bad, but it basically stands for Épreuve de Liège, which basically just means proof of Liège. This is a standard Liège proof mark that you would typically see on barrels, I believe. Now, what's really fascinating and super helpful about this marking is starting in 1893, this marking here would have a crown on top of it. And we don't see the crown on this one, which means this marking was applied before 1893. So that lines up really good with the known title of this gun, which is the prototype model of 1892. So that would make a lot of sense. Now, the other thing that makes a lot of sense is if we turn the rifle on its side here, let me just move him slightly, we're going to take a look at the rear sight base. Now, what's important here is that we see the markings. These are in Arshins. So this would be 400 up to 1200 Arshins. It may not seem like a lot at first glance, but this tells us a whole lot, actually. Mosins, and of course this actually is straight off of a Mosin, this rear sight base here. They would apply these Arshin markings on the right side of the sight base like this, up until sort of middle to late 1893. Afterwards, from 1893 all the way up until basically 1931, when the very last rifles were made with this style of rear sight base, the Arshin markings were applied on this side over here. And of course, we don't see anything here. Now, what this tells us is, because this is straight off of a Mosin, this rear sight base is off of a Mosin that was made during or before 1893. There weren't really all that many of them to begin with, so it would be very unlikely if this gun was made after 1893 that they would have had spare parts left over from 1893 production. If they had spare parts from the limited production runs from either 1892 or 1893, the most reasonable conclusion is that this gun was made in either 1892 or 1893. And we can see also here on top of the flat rear sight, which this has, this is the Tula hammer. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit more there. Right there is a Tula hammer inside a circle. This is probably the nicest example I have ever seen of an original Mosin flat rear sight. It retains the original finish. It's quite fascinating. And we see some other proof marks here as well. These are just going to be your standard like powder testing proof marks here to make sure the gun didn't blow up, essentially. So that about covers the markings. I will note here, this is the Russian Imperial Eagle, the PK Proof Commission, that of course we would also see on the later Mosins as well. If you look at any Berdan, you'll typically see something like this. And of course, the style varies based on the manufacturer. This is a Russian manufactured receiver, and we can't really tell who made it, unfortunately. I haven't found any specific markings. Berdans are a little bit more difficult, and while I've never actually had a Berdan completely apart before, I don't believe they have tang markings like Mosins do. But if I'm wrong, someone will correct me on that, and maybe we'll have to take a look at this one here. I will note, though, the stock doesn't match. However, it has a, if I can move this here slightly, bear with me, a Sestruyetsk arrow. So the stock is probably a Sestruyetsk. However, it doesn't match the rest of the numbers on the gun, you can see here, these are going to be the Liège applied numbers. This is 4413 on the barrel and receiver, and we see that number as well. If I move this over here on the bolt. Speaking of the bolt, how does this thing actually work? Well, let's take a look at that, because that's kind of important. All right, so the first thing we need to do is actually open up the bolt here. And this opens up, pretty similar to any other Berdan. You just pop that rascal open. This is a cock-on-close mechanism. And now the first thing we want to note here that is very different from any other Berdan is this rascal. That's a locking lug. Black powder Berdans have no front locking lugs. The only locking surface is this back section of the bolt handle against this back part of the receiver. I guess this sort of acts as like a secondary locking surface, but it's no longer the primary locking surface. If I open up this guy here now, we can see what they did in Liège. They cut out this channel here, which is for the other locking lug. That's right, this has not one, but two locking lugs. It actually has symmetrical locking lugs, which is a vast improvement over the original Berdan II design. Although it was sufficient for black powder, this is really, though, what you'd want for modern smokeless cartridges. And you can see here, this is the whole locking surface cutout that has now been created. And from what I read, potentially this is one of the big weaknesses of this design, or at least this is what the Russians thought to be a weakness, was there's really not a lot of material left here in this part of the receiver. You can see how much material they had to take out in order to make an area for the locking lugs to interface with. Very fascinating. So maybe that's one of the big reasons why this was rejected, although it seemed like, from what I can tell, there's not a lot of information on these, but these things actually worked. Now, this is one of the few guns in existence that actually is fully operational as far as I can tell. This firearm has not been deactivated in any way. It has the extractor, and it even has the firing pin. So, theoretically, this could be fired. There's one problem, though. This gun was actually made for the early 7.62x54 rimmed ammunition. It was like a bottlenose that looked something like this. And it was much lower pressure than the modern 54R. And I think if we were to attempt to shoot standard commercial 54R, I mean, it would fire, but you'd really risk damaging or cracking the stock. And that's a problem because these are custom stocks. To show you what I'm talking about here, they did a very similar thing that was done to the Polish 8mm Mosin conversions. They actually had to fill in a huge area in the stock. You can see this little seam here. And this is because the diameter of the Mosin barrel, the 7.62x54, is a lot smaller than the Berdan's 10mm barrel. So they had this big gap when they put a smaller barrel and said, oh no, we got to fill that gap. We'll just, shim it with some wood. But it goes basically all the way up to the very muzzle almost, which is crazy. Whereas, like the Polish 8mm conversions, the only reason they had to do that was because they had to shorten the chamber itself, so that there was only an area about like that much on both sides they had to shim. Instead of this, they had to shim the entire way up, which is just crazy. But I digress. Back to the bolt, because I think that's what a lot of people are interested about, because there's not a lot of good pictures or documentation. You do have to remove this screw, which I can't do on camera because of YouTube, but I will be back shortly. As you can see, I didn't even remove the screw. You don't quite have to. Now, you might ask, well, Big Sam, why can't you just remove the bolt? Aha! You see, that would be too simple, and that would make too much sense. This is a very, very clever design, and I've never actually seen anything like this. You can't actually pull the bolt back this way anymore because the locking lug hits the back of the receiver here. There's no cutout all the way back for this locking lug to be able to slide all the way out of the back. So you have to remove it from the front. So the rest of the bolt actually does come out this way, or this way. The bolt head and extractor have to come off this way before you can remove the bolt body that way. I know, it's pretty bizarre. So, literally, you just pull the bolt head off like that. See that? I can show you what it looks like here up close. You kind of have to finagle this thing a little bit. There we go. And it just comes out like that. So that is one Berdan II bolt head. I have also, you might notice, I do have some shaky hands. I've had some people ask if I'm okay because my hands shake so much. Yes, I'm fine. My hands have shaken for like 20 years. That's just the way God made me. It's not some like weird disease or anything. You should just be thankful that if you need an operation, I'm not a surgeon, because that probably wouldn't end well. All right. We can also see there's this interesting, looks like an S marking on the bottom here. This is the little cutout for the extractor. And of course, here's our dual locking lugs. I mean, I guess they're not exactly symmetrical. That pseudo-symmetrical, that's pretty crazy. The other thing I just want to point out here, this locking lug is slightly bigger than this locking lug. This is a very quirky gun. And I like quirky stuff. We look at a lot of quirky stuff on this channel. This might be the quirkiest thing that I've ever seen. From this point on, the bolt body removal is the same as any other Berdan. There's the little sear down here. You just have to depress that, then pull the trigger, and the bolt will just come out that way. But we're not going to do that. And that's really all there is to say. You can see there's a little extractor here. It's just held in by that screw. And if I turn it over, you can kind of see, yeah, they didn't even really have to mill out a channel for the locking lug on this side because it kind of rides above this surface, so there's no extra channel. So they really only had to do one channel there. What a weird gun. Other than that, you know, everything else is pretty much either standard Mosin or standard Berdan. Like, you know, from basically this point up, this point that way, it's Mosin, and from this point back, it's Berdan. I mean, it's like the ultimate Franken-Mosin. I mean, this is about as close as you can get to being a Mosin without actually being a Mosin. And that's really all I can say about it. One thing I'm not sure about is if Liège actually bothered producing brand new barrels, or if they just reused existing Mosin barrels. We don't really know. Either way, it's the exact same dimensions. And the rifling on this is absolutely beautiful. It's almost brand new. But it's hard to say. My theory is that they actually made the barrel themselves. They certainly had the capabilities in Liège because, that's what they did for a living. There's a lot of people capable of making barrels. So, there's a lot of mysteries about this gun, but I think we hopefully have a few less mysteries than, well, at least when we started today. Again, this is one of those guns I always thought I would probably never get to see in person. So, well, God proved me wrong yet again. I just never know what's around the next corner. So I hope you guys enjoyed taking a closer look at this rascal. All right, so now that we've had a chance to take a closer look at this rifle and what makes it tick, I hope you have a much better understanding, or at least maybe an appreciation of this gun. And maybe you learned about this gun for the first time today. I bet a lot of people didn't even realize that Belgium, of all people, converted Berdan IIs into 7.62x54R. Now, as I mentioned before, theoretically, this gun could be shot. I'm not really willing to be the person to do it, though. I feel good about just leaving it in the condition that it's in and not having to worry about, let's just say putting any more wear on it. However, if you really want to see this gun shot, post a link down in the comments and make your voices heard. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. You never know what's going to be coming next on the channel as evidence of this, right? So stay tuned for more if you like this kind of stuff. Please let me know if you guys have any prayer requests, and we'll see you next time.